Hello and welcome to another teaching from 119 Ministries. Our ministry believes that the whole Bible is true and directly applicable to our lives today. If you would like to know more about what we believe and teach, please visit us at testeverything.net. We hope that you enjoy studying and testing the following teaching. Leviticus 23 verse 2. Speak to the people of Israel and say to them, These are the appointed feasts of Yahweh, that you shall proclaim as holy convocations, Mikra. They are my appointed feasts. Leviticus 23 verse 3. 6 days shall work be done, but on the seventh day is a Sabbath of solemn rest, a holy convocation, Mikra. You shall do no work. It is a Sabbath to Yahweh in all your dwelling places. The English word convocation, found often in Leviticus 23, is a translation from the Hebrew word Mikra. The word is used nearly exclusively in the context of the Moedim, or Yahweh's appointed days, such as Passover or the Sabbath. It is usually translated as convocation or assembly in most English Bible translations. When one examines the word Mikra in a Strong's Concordance, one will see that Strong's repeatedly mentions Mikra to be an assembly or convocation. So often, many will point to Strong's as it relates to the Hebrew word Mikra and say, See? Mikra means assembly or convocation. The problem, however, with Strong's is that it was never intended to be used as a dictionary, but to simply show how translators chose to translate some words, specifically in the King James Version. However, if you notice, Strong's does mention Mikra as a rehearsal or a reading. Such a translation would be a more proper and accurate definition of the Hebrew word Mikra. Why would we say that? We will spend the rest of this teaching showing how Mikra does not really mean assembly or convocation, but instead really means being a proclamation, recital, reading, or rehearsal. This is all important for us to better understand what Yahweh meant by calling the Moedim a holy Mikra. The word Mikra is based on the root kara, meaning to call, recite, or proclaim. Its first usage in the Torah employs the usage of calling forth and proclaiming. Genesis chapter 1, verse 5. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. Day and night were called forth and proclaimed to exist through Yahweh's creation efforts. Here is a usage of kara employed more clearly in a sense of proclaiming. Exodus 33. And he said, I will make all my goodness pass before you, and will proclaim before you my name, Yahweh. And I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will show mercy on whom I will show mercy. Here is an example of kara being used in the sense of reading or reciting. Isaiah 29 verse 11. And the vision of all of this has become to you like the words of a book that is sealed. When men give it to one who can read, saying, Read this, he says, I cannot, for it is sealed. And when they give the book to one who cannot read, saying, Read this, he says, I cannot read. Many already know that many Arabic words came from the Hebrew. The Arabic word Quran, for example, as a term for the Islamic writings, actually means recital. As we already mentioned, many today understand and teach the word Mikra to mean gathering, assembly, or convocation, rather than a calling and proclaiming, since concordance dictionaries define it this way, mostly because of a misapplication of the aspect to call. The Hebrew term Mikra is best understood to be a calling and not the concrete idea of an actual assembly, understood through the additional context of a proclamation and a recital. There are at least 4 other Hebrew words that specifically mean assembly, yet none of those are ever used to refer to the weekly Sabbath or any of the other Moedim. The Septuagint, the Greek translation of the New Testament, could have translated Mikra as ekklesia, which would have indeed meant convocation or assembly. The Septuagint uses the word kletos for the Hebrew word Mikra. The Greek word kletos literally means called or appointed. The Mounce Greek Dictionary defines it as called to privileges or function. Notice that is not a convocation or assembly, but something different. How many have heard the Moedim referred to as Yahweh's appointed times? This is sort of where that understanding comes from. Yahweh has called forth or appointed the Moedim for a certain function. But what is that exactly? Looking at how Mikra was translated into the Greek a few centuries before Yeshua affords us at least a little understanding. However, looking at the Hebrew word Mikra a little more closely through a Hebraic lens affords us some better understanding. A holy or Kodesh Mikra is a special or set-apart calling or announcement, a proclamation, a rehearsal, or a recital. Even today, Mikra in Hebrew still literally means that which is read or proclaimed. For example, the Tanakh, or the Old Testament, is often called the Mikra by those who speak Hebrew. Why is the Tanakh called the Mikra by those who speak Hebrew? The reason behind this is that much of the Hebrew Bible was proclaimed orally through recitations or rehearsals of the original written text. The Tanakh is not called the Mikra because the Tanakh or Old Testament is a convocation or assembly. That would not even make any sense. How could the Old Testament be in an assembly? The Tanakh is called a Mikra because the Tanakh is proclaimed. It is orally read. It is a recital. It is a rehearsal. The Moedim, such as Passover or Sukkot, are holy recitations or holy rehearsals. Most who study the Moedim as Yahweh's appointed days already understand that the Moedim are rehearsals. We're not really presenting anything new. We're simply demonstrating how the proper understanding of the Hebrew word Mikra actually already reveals what most already know. The Moedim are prophetic shadows. They are rehearsals of Yahweh's prophetic work that has happened or is still to happen through Messiah Yeshua. The Moedim proclaim the prophetic work of Yahweh through Messiah Yeshua. As Yahweh's people, we observe these Moedim as rehearsals to prepare us for the fulfillment of coming prophecy, to help us understand what is to come or what has already occurred. That is what is meant to say that the Moedim are holy Mikra. The Moedim are appointed for this specific function. Mikra is not always incorrectly translated in English as assembly or convocation. A somewhat more accurate translation is found in Nehemiah, where it is translated as the reading in the ESV and other translations. Nehemiah chapter 8. They read from the book, from the law of God, clearly, and they gave the sense so that people understood the reading, the Mikra. When we read the Torah, we are proclaiming or reciting the Word of God. It simply isn't a reading. We don't simply read the Torah. We recite it and proclaim it. We memorize it. We rehearse it. By reciting and proclaiming the Torah, we are memorizing it. We are preserving the memory of the Torah. We are rehearsing the Torah. That is what is going on in the context of Mikra as it relates to the Moedim. That is what the Moedim are functionally. The word Moedim means the appointed times. The Moedim are to be proclaimed through reciting and rehearsal. It is our calling as those in the faith to proclaim the Torah and proclaim the prophetic message behind the appointed times by doing them. Leviticus 23 verse 2. Speak to the people of Israel and say to them, these are the appointed feasts, Moedim, of Yahweh, that you shall proclaim as holy convocations. They are my appointed feasts. A better translation of Mikra would be the following. Speak to the people of Israel and say to them, these are the appointed feasts of Yahweh, that you shall proclaim as holy rehearsals or recitals. They are my appointed feasts. The proclamation occurs by what we do on these appointed days to memorialize and remember. What are we rehearsing? Let's go to the next verse as an example. Leviticus 23 verse 3. 6 days shall work be done, but on the seventh day is a Sabbath of solemn rest, a holy convocation, Mikra. You shall do no work. It is a Sabbath to Yahweh in all your dwelling places. What are we to do on Shabbat? We rest. It is the resting that proclaims this day. It is the resting that memorializes this day. It is the resting that is the rehearsal. Resting on the Sabbath every seventh day is a practice run of the eventual fulfillment of this Sabbath as a prophetic day. When Messiah Yeshua returns, we will rest with him on the 7,000th year for 1,000 years as we reign with him. For more on this, see our teaching Hebrews 4 in his rest now or later. Each moed, or appointed time, reminds us of what our Messiah prophetically did do or will do in the future. That is why it is an appointed time. Each day, such as Passover, first fruits, unleavened bread, Shavuot, trumpets, atonement, and Sukkot, all have aspects that Yahweh has called us to proclaim, recite, and memorialize every year to teach us about our Messiah. They are messianic rehearsals. As Yahweh mentions these things we are to do, he reminds us through the word Mikra that these appointed days are recitals, proclamations, and a means to memorialize the prophetic nature and promises that were fulfilled and will be fulfilled by our Messiah. That all fits the context and the root definition of the word for Mikra. The Mikra is rooted in the words of calling, remembering, a memorial, or reciting. It is also a proclamation. This understanding is more consistent with the purpose and the related context of the Moedim, when we are supposed to understand the Moedim as a memorial and recital of what has happened, as a divine appointment, and what will prophetically still occur on those days. By us memorializing and practicing the Moedim, we are proclaiming our faith that Yahweh will do what he has professed that he will do on those days. The rehearsal aspect relates back to the prophetic nature of us practicing the Moedim, which teaches us about Yeshua when he prophetically fulfills these days. There is nothing that suggests that a holy convocation, or in Hebrew, Kodesh Mikra, mandates meeting with others on any specific day. It is really about the messianic prophecy from Yahweh, remembering and reciting the memorial of his Moedim as a prophetic proclamation of our faith of the previous and future reality of the divine appointments through Messiah Yeshua. For additional consideration, in the event that you are still not convinced, consider this. Most who adhere to the testimony of the Brit Hadashah or New Testament also agree that Messiah Yeshua was sinless. Let's suppose for a moment that Mikra literally does mean convocation or assembly. That would mean that in Leviticus 23 and in other places, we are literally commanded to assemble with others. That is just fine, except when we consider that our Messiah Yeshua started his ministry by literally not assembling with anyone for 40 days and 40 nights while he was in the desert. There would have been several Shabbats in a row in which he did not assemble with anyone. If sin is the breaking of the Torah, then that would have Yeshua breaking the Torah. But of course, that is only if Mikra really means to assemble or to have a convocation, which we do not believe that to be the case. There are several clear Hebrew words that absolutely means to assemble, and none of those were used in Leviticus 23 or anywhere else as it relates to Moedim. This is not to say that meeting or assembling with others is bad, so please do not misunderstand us. Meeting with others in the faith is certainly a good thing and conducive to our spiritual health. It is not uncommon for those to meet on the Moedim. The elements of feasting in some of those days almost prescribe it as an intended outcome. We would simply suggest that it is not a commandment. The Moedim are holy rehearsals of what Yahweh has done or will do through Messiah Yeshua. That is what it means for the Moedim to be Mikra. Thus, we believe that Mikra, in the context of the Moedim, is proclaiming or calling forth the Moedim as prophetic recitals, rehearsals, or shadows of the work of the Messiah. These are all legitimate definitions of Mikra depending on the context. The Moedim are called out for a specific purpose, and that purpose is to be a prophetic foreshadow of Messiah Yeshua. To improperly state that we are commanded by the Torah to assemble on the Moedim, even when Yeshua did not always assemble on the Moedim, is to make Yeshua, your Messiah, a breaker of the Torah, sin. And then we would no longer have a valid sacrifice and hope of the resurrection. We hope that this teaching has blessed you. And remember, continue to test everything. Shalom.
It is because of you, our generous supporters, who make it possible to offer these high-quality teachings completely free of charge. If you feel led to support 119 Ministries so that we can continue this effort, please visit testeverything.net and click on the Support 119 tab. Learn how you can partner with us to take the whole Word of God to the nations.